Hey, welcome to the last of 3 videos I did on the motor muster at Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan. My other 2 videos, I did one on just the trucks, station wagons, and campers, and then I did one on just the Mopar. In this video, I'm just going to be walking around and sort of generally looking at the show. Anyway, there's a lot of interesting stuff here. Let's get started and see what's there. Well, let's start things off with a car that I didn't immediately recognize, so I walked up to see exactly what it was. There's usually a name on these things. Ah, yes, it's one of those. As it turns out, this is a car built in the Soviet Union in 1978. This is a VAZ and was developed in a joint agreement between VAZ in the Soviet Union and Fiat. It's kind of sort of based on the Fiat 124, and these things were actually exported under the name Lada. Not really terrible looking for a Soviet car. Next up, sticking with 1978, we have a Honda Civic. We'll get to some older cars, I just have some patience, but this one is cool too. I don't really see these early Civics too often because they were notorious rusters. This is the last year for the first generation of Honda Civic, and that was the first real export success for Honda. Remember, they were a motorcycle manufacturer who had just started making cars in 1963 for the domestic market. These eventually had a real impact on the U.S. compact car market in the 1970s, what with the fuel crisis and all. 1975 Chevy Laguna S3. This is actually a Chevelle package. The S3 replaced the earlier Chevelle SS that you may be more familiar with. So this was intended as a performance package, standard with the 350, although you could get the 400 or 454 in there. Also first year for the catalytic converter. 1975 Bricklin SV1. The Bricklin was one of those noble attempts to create an independent car company, and this was the creation of Malcolm Bricklin. This was aimed at the Corvette market, and it had its issues. Those gull-wing doors are hydraulically operated from a actual hydraulic pump, and it took about 12 seconds to open. The body is all fiberglass, and both front and rear bumpers were designed to retract into the car on low-impact crashes so that you wouldn't have any cosmetic damage. The engine was initially an AMC 360, but for 1975 for this car, they had switched to the Ford 351. Ultimately, the car's high price and quality control issues doomed the company, and they only really made them in 1974, 5, and 6. Hey, it's a 1973 Gremlin X. I think the Gremlins have sort of become more beloved as time goes by. You might be wondering what that X is. The Gremlin X, the X is really just a trim package. It's an appearance package to make it a little bit cooler because everything is more cool with an X on the end. This one's a manual, although you could get them with an automatic transmission, and they had a variety of engine options. Everything from a 199 to a 304. In the mood for something a little French? Here's a 1973 Citroën 2CV6. The CV, by the way, is short for chevaux, which is horses in French. The original prototypes of this car in 1939 had 2 horsepower. This 1973, though, has a 6-cylinder engine making, 33 horsepower. Well, that's better anyway. The 2CV is an interesting car. I'll have to talk more about it at some point. Anyway, on to others. Here's something with a little more horsepower. This is a 1968 Shelby GT500 KR. Note that the 68 GTs modified by Shelby are no longer called Ford Mustangs. They are just called Shelbys. The KR stands for King of the Road, and that means that there's a 428 Cobra Jet engine under the hood. The 428 is already a big engine because there's no replacement for displacement, and the Cobra Jet is the performance version of that. Shelby then added valve covers that said Cobra Le Mans in honor of his dominance of the Le Mans race in 67 and 68. You have to really appreciate the amount of work that all of these cars get. Take a look at this car right here. This is this car here. That was just a phenomenal amount of work to bring it from that picture to this state here, and every one of these cars has seen this amount of effort. When you're at these car shows, you really have to appreciate every car. That's why you'll never hear me say anything bad about anybody's car on this channel, because I know that every car is somebody's baby. Sure, I might talk realistically about the history of a particular model, but I'm never going to say anything bad about an individual car. Look at the upholstery on the 65 Mustang GT. That is just wonderful. This guy really put the hours in, and it shows. He has every right to be proud. These are always neat to see. This is a 1966 Selby GT 350H. Once again, this is not a Mustang. This is properly just called a Shelby. Anyway, this is the standard GT 350, but the H stands for Hertz. As a special promotion, about 1,000 GT 350s were given special Hertz badging and paint schemes and were actually available to rent through Hertz, the Rent-A-Racer program. Now, not a lot of these actually survived because, believe it or not, some of them got rented, and then when they got returned, a lot of the race components had somehow disappeared. This program was not repeated in subsequent years. Let's take a walk and see what else is here. It looks like we got some boats at this show. Let's go check them out. The theme for this year's show was Mopar, and looks like we've got a special display of Chrysler outboard engines and the boats they went on here. We've got some old ones. That was from 1941, that little one. Over here behind this Lone Star, we get some boats that have tail fins because we're getting into the 50s. This one right here is a Glass Magic Playmaster. The glass, of course, stands for fiberglass. In the 1950s, fiberglass was just starting to become more normal for boats, and they're really starting to play with shapes. Take a look at this one here. This is a Fireflight from Glasstron. And I've always really liked the shape of this one. And if you've got a vintage car and you're also into boats, the Glasstron Fireflight would be an excellent choice. Look, this thing screams 1950s from bow to stern. Not only does it have tail fins, but in car design, it has what you would refer to as a Darren dip just before that. There's also a display of outboard motors, including this really cool airboat motor that sits up above the water with a propeller. I don't know, I just find it super cool, especially kind of in that vintage aqua color. Anyway, this is another Chrysler engine. We have some other engines here. This one is an Elgin, very popular brand, goes way back, and some other engines here. Here's a nice Chrysler Cutaway that shows all the inner workings. As it turns out, we have a whole contingent here from the Antique Outboard Motor Club Great Lakes chapter. So if you're into old boats or old motors, you might give these guys a look. Anyway, back to cars. Here is an obviously well-loved 1961 VW Beetle with sunroof. Anyway, the Beetle's name is Amos, and he comes with a whole passel of paraphernalia. I really like the luggage rack that sits behind the roof. That's not a roof rack because you've got a sunroof there. You don't want to interfere with it. That sits all over the engine bay. The engine bay looks like it has seen some attention. I'm guessing you can drive Amos anywhere. They brought their vintage go-kart. This is, according to the sign, a 1960 Fox Go Boy. I don't really know much about vintage go-karts. I just know that it's sort of a world unto itself, and there's people that are really into it. Moving back just a few years, we have this 1959 Cadillac Series 62. Those fins kind of epitomize the 1959 more is more aesthetic. This model is sometimes referred to as the flat top, and if you look at that roof line, you can kind of see why. There's an interesting feature inside here. If we look up on the dash, there's a what's called an autotronic eye. There it is right in the middle. That is an automatic headlight dimmer. Yeah, they had those in 1959. Not just the tail fins that are more, the overall length of this car is just phenomenal. 59s are always great to see. Stepping back just a few more years, you have this 1937 Buick Special. Under the hood here should be the seminal Buick Fireball Straight 8. A lot of people really love the flatheads, but I don't think the Fireball gets enough credit. This was an overhead valve engine with tons of low-end torque. The 320 version ultimately got up to 170 stock horsepower. In 1941, this was the first engine to feature compound carburation. I think it deserves more love than it gets. There's a lot of great 1930s cars here. There's a Ford, another Buick, that's the red one, and then a Chevrolet down on the end there. The Chevrolet has something that you may have seen sometimes at car shows, but maybe didn't fully understand. Let me just take a little bit to talk about this sticker right there. Gasoline was rationed in World War II, and that letter A is a ration sticker. That letter A was for the general public and entitled you to no more than 4 gallons a week. Sticking with Buick and moving up to 1950, here is a 1950 Buick Super with that iconic bumper grille. Also, he's got his hood open, so we get a little closer look at that Fireball Straight 8 that I was talking about earlier. The Fireball Straight 8 was continued to 1953 when it was replaced by the famous Nailhead. Looking inside, this is just a beautiful car that just screams early 50s with all that chrome. Just a nice looking car. Another 1950 Buick. This one is a Riviera, a very nice hardtop. You can see this has no B-pillar. That's that would be the pillar between the front and rear windows. Traditionally, when you use the word hardtop, it refers to a car like this that doesn't have a B-pillar. Although, like all car terms, it kind of gets muddled a little bit. Hey, it's a Hudson Hornet. This is a 1952. Now, the Hudson Hornet was, of course, very famous for its race heritage, and you might be forgiven if you believe that all of the Hudsons of this year were Hornets, but actually they had the Hudson Hollywood, the Wasp, the Pacemaker, and the Commodore. Standard on the Hornet this year was the Twin H Power. That's a dual carburation setup that boosted horsepower up to 160. Back over to Buick one more time, we have a 1953 Buick Roadmaster. And then over next to that, we have a 1938 Packard 8. The Packard features a non-stock hood ornament. This is one of a series of glass hood ornaments crafted by French glassmaker René Lalique. Lalique's glass hood ornaments appeared on high-end cars in the 1920s and 30s, and it's always nice to see one. And of course, it's right at home on this 1938 Packard with the dual side mounts and just the massive convertible top. Next up, we have another Packard. This is a 1941 Packard 120. The Packard 110s and 120s are sometimes referred to as the junior Packards and represented Packard's first foray into sort of the middle market price range. The cars proved to be very successful and gave Packard the cash flow it really needed to survive in the post-Depression era. It also put Packard's styling within reach of the middle class. Here's a car a lot of people recognize right off the bat. This is a 1949 Mercury. This one is in nice as-found condition, which I like to see. You know, not every car has to be completely restored to the nines. The seat covers kind of remind me of the ones I had on my first truck, which of course makes me happy. A little mild custom work on the fender skirts. Looks like just an overall fun car to drive. The owner might get a little tired of James Dean references, though. Now here's a bit of a rare car. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. It's a VW Beetle, but let's take a closer look. See the little vent door there? The little semaphore slot for the turn signal? Let's walk around back. You see the little rear window with the split down the middle, the teeny tiny tail lights. We're looking at a 1951 Type 1 Beetle here. This is kind of rare to see, considering that import into the U.S. only started in 1950, the year before that, with a whopping 330 units. Not 330,000, 330 cars. Moving on to what you might argue would be the opposite of the Beetle, here is a 1941 Cadillac Series 62, and a beautiful car at that. Hey, there's another ration sticker. This one is a letter B, not the letter A. Now, the letter B, that was for cars that were used for business purposes or for business owners. They got rationed 8 gallons of gas per week instead of the 4. So having that sticker on a Cadillac, that kind of tracks. Kind of like a deadhead or a black flag sticker, depending on your era. Speaking of eras, here's Ford in its flathead era. See how I connect with the Taylor Swift crowd? It's subtle. Anyway, this is a 1940 Ford Deluxe. The Deluxe Coupe came in 2 varieties. If it had no back seat, it was a club coupe. If it had little folding back seats, it was a business coupe. These were also referred to as 5-window coupes, even though I think the back window should count as 2, but that's just me. Very formal roofline on this 1941 Cadillac that we're seeing the back end of. And over next to that, we have a 1940 Lincoln. Catch that one-piece rear window. That's something that appeared first this year on the Lincolns. Also, first year for sealed beam headlights. Also, fancier front end on the Lincoln than the regular Ford with nice curved lines. There's the front end of that Cadillac again. As you can see, they're very organized with this show. So let's go down, take a look at some other cars. When you see those chrome strips down the center of the hood, you know that we're dealing with a Pontiac. This is a 1952 in this case. The hood chrome was a long-standing Pontiac styling feature. The whole event is sponsored by Hagerty Insurance. This car was parked over in their area as kind of the welcome car to the event. This is a 1963 MGB in iris blue. The MGBs had a long run. They were made from 1962 to 1980, and they were a popular import here into the United States, so they're not really that uncommon to see. This one is in remarkably well-preserved original condition. Hey, let's go look at some military stuff. Here is a 1942 Ford. Of the three original companies that were vying for the Jeep contract, Willys, Ford, and Bantam, Willys and Ford were the ones that ended up making the Jeeps. The Willys built Jeeps during World War II were referred to as the MB, and the Fords were the GPW. Bantam was deemed not to have enough manufacturing capacity to build the Jeep, and they were awarded a contract for trailers. Also parked over the military section is this 1942 Cadillac Series 75 limousine. Remember I was talking about ration stickers? Well, this car has the ultimate one, the X. That means you get unlimited gasoline. These were typically given to politicians, dignitaries, or rich people with enough pull. Anyway, there was a whole series of these ration stickers. C was for essential workers, M was for motorcycle, T was for truckers, or early on that was an S, and then there were D, E, and R ration books. It got a little complicated. I see we're selling war bonds over here, and we're having a scrap drive with some authentic Model T parts being turned in for scrap. This is actually a bigger part of automotive history than more people realize. The World War II scrap drives were a contributor to why a lot of the earlier pre-war cars are so rare today. They just got chewed up for the war effort. I see they're also collecting rubber. There were a lot of bicycles at the show. The show does include all vehicles 1932 to 78, starting with this 1938 Shelby Speedline Airflow. In fact, if you have a vintage bike, this show may be one of the few opportunities that you have to show it, and they have a lot of them here. I'm just going to kind of walk down the line and pick out some of the more interesting ones. The show goes up to 1978, so there are a lot of the Schwinn Stingray style of bikes. There were a lot of variations on that theme, and those have really become hot collectible items these days. There's also some unusual things, little pedal cars, and this one here is interesting. This is a Strano. This is a European import. This is designed to be small and easily disassembled if you're working out of a camper trailer or if you have a small apartment. Here's some more of these, like I said, Stingray style bikes. The Schwinn Stingray came out in 1963 and was a huge hit. Schwinn itself had a lot of different versions of it, and then, of course, other companies had their own versions, and these are all collectible. I thought this was kind of neat. This is a 1973 PPV, or People-Powered Vehicle. I was really kind of taken with this one because it really has that sort of 1970s aesthetic, both in design and also kind of the name really evokes the kind of the 70s feel. It's got those cool handlebars, plus it's like a pedal-powered boat on land. What's not to love? So here's that Schwinn Stingray that I was talking about. This is a 1969 Schwinn Stingray crate, and this is the one that everyone was trying to copy. It's got that sparkly green banana seat. It's got the automotive-style shifter. Great bike. Moving from bicycles to motorcycles, there's an impressive contingent here too, like this 1947 Indian Chief. That first one over there was a Solex, by the way. Over next to that, we have another Indian. This is a Indian 741 from 1941, obviously a military bike. The Indian 741 and 841s were unique bikes with unique drivetrains and not just military versions of the civilian bikes. And of course, another Indian rounds out this awesome row. Oh, geez, the Indian motorcycle hits just keep coming. Here is a 1940 Indian DT39 Dispatch Tow. What an awesome bike to look at here. Back to military bikes, here's a 1943 Harley WLA. Unlike that Indian that we just looked at, this actually was based on the civilian WL model. This one's a little special, though. It does have that sidecar on there, which is super cool. Also, I think that rifle case constitutes legal open carry. I could be wrong on that. I'm not a gun expert. There's quite a number of Vespas here, although some of them are labeled as Allstate. Allstate was the Sears store brand, and basically they are rebadged Vespas. In fact, there's one right there. They also did the same thing with Cushman's. And weirdly enough, cars. In the early 50s, they sold Henry J's through Sears, and those were badged as Allstate. I always thought Sears store brands were interesting, like J.C. Higgins, that was used for bicycles and also guns, because why not? Here's a 1964 Allstate / Vespa, and a very nice Whizzer, and I think that's a Solex back there. I could be wrong. And this is followed up by the 1973 Honda ST90, the classic dirt bike. The ST stands for Sport Trail. Now here's something a little unusual. This is a 1955 Moto Devil by OCMA. They were an Italian manufacturer. They got their start as a component manufacturer and made the Devil from 1953 to 1957. 1954 Pony Cycle. The Pony Cycles were a little motor scooter made from 1953 to 1958 by Hawk Tool and Engineering in Clarkston, right here in southeastern Michigan. Here's another pony cycle, this one from the U.S. Army. Both the Army and the Air Force use these pony cycles for just maintenance vehicles around their bases. Pony cycles can be found for sale here and there, but the military versions are hard to find. Neat 1950s scooter. Anyway, back to cars. Here's a 1938 MGSA. Man, this one has the classic early MG hood ornament. That is, in fact, a mosquito, or as they refer to it in the UK, a midge. MG, midge, get it? It's sort of alliterative. Anyway, in 38, MG was well known for their TA sports cars. The SA was a much larger car for the Gentile set. The body style is called a Tickford, named after the manufacturer of the convertible top, by the way. That's a 3-position convertible top. It can be all the way down in the center position or all the way up. Custom coach work is by Salmons and Sons. This car features another classic British feature, the jack-all system. See, we have internal car jacks so that you can actuate them individually to jack the car up. 1936 Pierce Arrow, and this still has one of the classic Pierce Arrow features of the headlights fared into the fenders like that. This is unfortunately one of the last of the breed. This is a 1936 Pierce Arrow, went into receivership in 1938. Remember earlier I was talking about Pierce's competitor Packard and how they fielded a mid-priced car that gave them the cash flow it took to stay afloat. Pierce Arrow never did that, and they just ran out of money. They did branch out a little bit at the very end and offered a Pierce Arrow travel trailer, but that really didn't help. Neither did their new V12. Pierce positioned itself as the upper end of the car market right up to their very last day. Hey, it's another big chrome strip down the center of the hood, so obviously we're dealing with another Pontiac. This one is from 1936. The chrome strip, referred to as the Silver Streak, started in 1935 and continued all the way up through 1956. Although those last 2 years it was a double stripe suspenders kind of a thing. Anyway, a nice looking 1935 Plymouth here. I like the 30s Plymouths because I have a 37 Plymouth project back in the barn somewhere. Ooh, very nice. 1934 Ford Flathead here. There's a really nice Ford V8 museum down in Auburn, Indiana. Go check it out if you haven't. Hey, boogity, 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 let's go racing. We have a whole section of race cars, including this 1976 AMC Pacer. I know, I hear you. They used to race Pacers? Yeah, they did. And this is not like a mock-up. This is the real deal that raced back in the 70s. In fact, take a look at where this car has raced. This thing has been at Talladega, Daytona, Watkins Glen. This is the real deal. Here's a picture of it back in the day. So give the Pacer a little track respect here. Over in the race car area, there was this 47 Indian. It looks like a barn find, although I think the bird's nest on the handlebars maybe is a bit much. Nice patina, though. There's an Allard. If you're not familiar, Allard was a British company. They produced sports cars in the late 40s through early to mid 50s and used mostly American engines. This is a 1948 K1. They only made 151 K1s. This one has a Mercury flathead in there. That's been specially modified and tuned for racing. This one raced in Europe at the Monte Carlo, Lisbon, and Alpine rallies. So cool race history on this one too. Here's another car that you don't immediately think of when you think about racing. This is a 1962 Austin Mini Cooper. Looks like this one is using the stock Austin engine, but I'm guessing it's been race tuned. Anyway, if you didn't know, Minis have an extensive racing history in general, winning both speed and endurance races. They mostly raced in Europe, but also made appearances here in America and the Trans Am series in the late 60s and early 70s. So yeah, Minis could scoot. Also, just a reminder that there are way more cars here than I could ever possibly cover. So if you see a cool car in the background that I don't talk about, my apologies. I'm just kind of walking around talking about what catches my eye. Cars like this 1957 Buick Special, or his friend over here, this other Buick, a 1955 Buick Super. Hey, nice Dagmars. Those two Buicks aren't the only birds of a feather parked together. There's a whole Nash contingent here. Look at all the Metropolitans. The Metropolitans were kind of an early subcompact car that were made from 1953 to 1962 by Nash. And although Nash is an all-American company, these were actually assembled in England. This was an American-designed car, but assembled by Austin Motors in Birmingham and then exclusively shipped into the United States. Nice 1956 Chevrolet. Here's some basic car identification for you. See that back trim that kind of dips down? On the 1955, that goes straight back, all the way back, instead of dipping down. The 56 dips down, and then in 57, they added the little fin on top of that. 1956 Packard. We're getting towards the end of the Packard run here, but they're still producing some really sharp-looking cars. I particularly like the Packard paint schemes from the mid-50s. They really knew how to do some tasteful tritones. The Packard name disappeared just 2 years after this. Here's the company they merged with, Studebaker. This is a 1957 Studebaker, actually a Golden Hawk. The Golden Hawk was the fastest production car of its time. This could easily beat a Corvette in both the quarter mile and 0 to 60. So a little respect for Studebaker here. I don't know why these are not more popular than they are. Here's a 1957 Chevrolet. See, the chrome dips down in the back, sort of just like the 56, but now we've got a little fin on top. So that's generally true for identifying the 55, 56, and 57 Chevys. Nice car. Here's something we don't see over in the States very often. This is a 1960 MG Magnet. Technically produced by British Motor Corporation, or BMC. For a while in the 50s and 60s, BMC was kind of like General Motors in England. They controlled Austin, Morris, MG, Riley, and Wolseley, and eventually merged with Jaguar. 1960 Chevy Corvette. Always nice to see the early Corvettes. Hey, it's like I'm on the radio. This is the car that Ronnie and the Daytonas thought was really looking fine. Both the song and the car are from 1964. Over here, pulling up on my right, we have an XKE. This is the car that slid into Dead Man's Curve and never came back. Honestly, though, every time I see an XKE, I have to stop and admire it. There's just beautiful, beautiful cars. Let's take a little walk over into the 70s, see what's shaking over there. 1976 Mustang II. Actually, really just Mustang. When Ford came out with the second generation Mustang in 1973, they just referred to it as the Mustang II. This one has kind of a rare stallion appearance package. It's still owned by the original owners, a nice couple. This was their wedding getaway car back in the day. Well, I could talk all day, but we're at about the half-hour mark, so I think I'll wrap it up here with this 1976 Ford Pinto. This will be my last car because no one really wants to follow behind one of those. Yeah, it's a joke. But anyway, the Pintos, kind of like the Gremlins and the Pacers, have been picking up in popularity in recent years. I think they've become cooler now than they ever were when they were new. Well, I hope you enjoyed a day of just walking around and looking at cars. Anyway, if you like that, I did do 2 other videos on this same show. One of just the trucks, station wagons, and campers, and one on the Mopar at this show. So go check those out. Anyway, I've got some other videos coming up. I'm going to be doing the history of the Rio Motor Car Company, so that should be fun. Anyway, subscribe to the channel. There should be a link right about there to subscribe. Go ahead and like or comment. Oh, by the way, if you're watching some of my really old videos, don't be afraid to comment on those. I see all the comments, they pop up. Anyway, there's a link right about there to go and look at some of my other videos. So enjoy. Until next time, I'll talk to you later.